Let's make history. The territory which would one day become Flushing, Queens, was first settled by an Algonquin-speaking Native American tribe known as the Metsinacock. The Dutch arrived in the early 1600s and they called it Vissegem. And when the British took over, it slowly anglicized to Flushing, and it was named after a town in the Netherlands where the Dutch East India Company was headquartered. And the Dutch East India Company owned the land from a deal they made with the Metsinacock. Famous Dutch governor Peter Stuyvesant, who, by the way, the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bedford-Stuyvesant is partially named after, put a ban, an edict banning all Quakers, and anyone who would harbor Quakers were to be imprisoned and sometimes even sent back to the Netherlands. And then you also began to have Englishmen who trickled down from the Connecticut area because of persecution, religious persecution from the Puritans. And oddly enough, many people came over to the quote-unquote New World to escape religious persecution in Europe and come to the New World to face it again. So they began to make their way south to places like Flushing. The original charter advertised this area as a place of religious tolerance. Behind me still stands the Quaker House, where Quaker meetings were still held in defiance. John Bone, who was an Englishman, who would let Quakers worship and congregate at his house during the time when Governor Stuyvesant strictly prohibited this. He was actually banished and sent back to the Netherlands, where he pled his case with the Dutch East India Company. They sided with him and reprimanded Governor Stuyvesant. Because of John Bone and what he was able to accomplish against all odds, Flushing is also known as the birthplace of religious freedom in the Western Hemisphere and tolerance of all religions, not just Quakers, but also Jews and Egyptians as well, who were also ostracized and cast out by the Dutch Reformed Church. Flushing is also considered to be the birthplace of horticulture in the New World. It had some of the first, what they call tree nurseries, thanks to Margaret Carmen Green, which this park here that I'm walking past is named after. During the construction of Central Park, many of the trees came from this area of Flushing. And the tree nurseries, we started from really 3 towns. Some people say 4 or 5. I say 3. Some people count Hempstead, which was very instrumental in the development of Queens. But as we know, Hempstead is part of Long Island. It's not part of New York City. And Flushing was one of those towns. You had Jamaica, much larger than Jamaica is today. You had Newton, which was basically the whole western half of Queens. And then you had Flushing, which was the northeastern portion of Queens before it became part of New York City in 1898 and just went to become a regular neighborhood. And actually the neighborhood of Flushing now, what's considered Flushing, is much smaller than the original town of Flushing, which also encompasses many other areas. Queens Historical Society is actually in Flushing, and I'm standing in front of it right now. This is the Lewis Latimer House, who was actually a black man, an inventor, self-taught poet, and a painter. And this is his historic Victorian home right here in Flushing. It's now considered a landmark, and the evolution of the light bulb, he contributed to that. He was just an inventor in general. He also helped develop bathrooms and toilets for subway cars, among other things. It is now a museum. And Flushing, Queens, nowadays in the 21st century, is primarily a Far East Asian enclave, but there is a significant amount of Latin Americans who reside here as well. Huge population of Koreans as well as Taiwanese, Chinese, etc. It's even said that Flushing Chinatown now rivals New York City's premier Chinatown in Manhattan. There was a Nathaniel Hale who's considered an American patriot, and he served as a spy in the American Revolution. Washington needed more intelligence to move forward. He wanted to know when Manhattan was going to be invaded. Mr. Hale was the only one to volunteer, and unfortunately, he was captured by the British in Flushing and killed. This is called the Flushing Memorial. Speaking of war, as they say, there's no peace without war. They go hand in hand, unfortunately. And over there at the corner, you see the Flushing Town Hall, where Frederick Douglass actually made speeches. This area of Queens was also very instrumental in the abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad. And of course, Flushing is home to Citi Field, which is home to the New York Mets, Major League Baseball team, known for most of its existence as Shea Stadium. Check out my video on the history of the New York Mets. Though I am a Yankee fan, just had to put that out there.